All right, this is the follow up, and we are following up today on a live video I did on Georgia Space Chat not too long ago, which featured the great Will Lee. It was entitled Will Lee's Business. My guest today on the follow up is none other but the great Frank Gravis, himself longtime bass player and educator here in New York City. Frank, thank you so much for making yourself available, and welcome to the follow up.
Thank you for having me, George. I appreciate this.
Oh, my pleasure. All right. So, for those watching, for those listening, let me give you some background as to why I thought Frank would be a great guest here on the follow up. In the live video, Will Lee's Business, I was talking to Will about the business of playing bass and him being somewhat of an outlier since he has had a very successful, very long career and continues to do so. Now, my assertion is that these outliers, Will Lee being one of them, Ron Carter being another one, but basically all these players that we grew up listening and emulating, those I call those extremes or outliers, and because they've done so much work. And them being extremes and outliers kind of informs what the rest of us in the middle are doing. Now, during the conversation with Will, we talked a lot about the studio scene back in the day here in New York City, the jingle scene back in the day. And I thought it would be great to have Frank on simply because he was one and he is one of the players who was extremely busy during that time. And I thought it would be interesting to get his perspective on the business side of things, what happened back then, how it is now, what the development has been, et cetera, et cetera. So, Frank, let me turn it over to you. In the live video, we of course, we went through an entire array of time periods, but let's focus perhaps on the 80s going into the 90s, because that was sort of, that can be characterized as a time period in New York when the studio scene kind of shifted. Why don't you take us back to how it was back then and how it kind of presented itself to you?
Okay, I got here in 1977, and at that time I was, I had gone. Hiram Bullock and I were college buddies, and I basically, when I first got to town, I crashed on his couch until I got my own apartment.
Awesome.
And they, along with, well, I'll get to that. They helped to spread my name around at that time, because I was basically just trying to make a living as a bass player, and they at that time were all the guys in the 24th Street Band, which of course were Hiram, Clifford Carter on keyboards, and Steve Jordan on drums.
Right.
And they were trying to spread my name around, and they did, as well as one other guy, and that is Russell George. Russell heard a recording of a demo that I had done, and Russell at that time was like one of the workingest bass players in town, and he helped me a lot as well. And I was basically a studio musician, and I was doing, I was getting like, I was in the studio 3 to 4 times a week at one point.
Right.
And doing jingles and demos and all kinds of studio work.
Right.
And the jingle scene was, it was basically, I would go to a studio, and I would see basically a lot of the same guys, and there was a big circle of musicians that did that kind of work.
Right.
And they were all great. And I realized pretty quickly that I had to bring my A game to the table every time.
Right.
There was no time for of having a bad day. Well, you had better days than others when you just did. But every studio session had to be, you had to bring your A game to the table
Right.
and because that's what everybody else was doing, and you sort of had to rise to the occasion.
Mhm.
And as you said, that started to wane. Now, well, see, what happened with me is in 1979, I joined Herbie Mann,
Right.
and he started to take me out on the road a lot. I mean, we were constantly, as soon as I joined his band, we started traveling.
Right.
And in those days, when you got a job with a traveling band and stopped taking the studio calls, they would just be like, sort of draw a line through your name and call the next guy,
Right. Right.
and which is what happened to me. And
Right.
not long after that, though, MIDI came along
Mhm.
and basically put a lot of us out of work.
Right.
But there was still some work in the, I had a bit of a resurgence in the 90s, in the early 90s, where like I started, and the late 80s, where I started to, work for a couple of offices that were alive and kicking back then. One of them was Look and Company,
Mhm.
and the other one was Crushing,
Mhm.
both of which did they Look and Company. I did a bunch of like regional jingles for them,
Right.
and with Crushing, I did a lot of national jingles. I
Nice.
did a bunch with Coca-Cola and Pepsi, and
Right.
big,
Right.
the big names.
Right.
And
Right. Right.
uh it was a pretty good scene back then. It was
Interesting. Now this is great stuff. Please continue. Yeah. Yeah.
no, and so I basically took it as far as I could. There were some writers that would call me all the time.
Mhm.
I'll tell you one funny story. A good friend of good friend of mine, who is now passed on,
Mhm.
used to he was a writer for Look and Company, and I'll never forget the first time he called me. He the word got out that I'm originally from San Antonio, so he
Mhm.
thought I was the thing that he called me for was a Texas blues,
Oh wow.
sort of a lopey kind of a shuffle. So I walk into the studio, and I said, "Well, listen, what are we doing here?" Because
Mhm.
I was presented with a chord sheet,
Right.
and he goes, "Well, it's sort of a Texas blues." He goes, "Unga, unga, 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 unga." And I said, "All right, cool. I could do that." So, I did it. And so I get a call the following week, and I go in there, and it's the same writer. And I look at the chord sheet, and I said, "Okay, well, what is this one?"
Right.
"Well, it's sort of a Texas blues." And
It's
so I said, "Okay, okay." Well, so I did that. And the same thing happened the third week. And
okay.
it occurred to me that this is the only thing that they're calling me for.
Yeah.
So I remember on the third week, I pulled him aside and I said, "Listen, just so you know, I do other kinds of music other than Texas blues. I mean, I have a, a wider range than that. So, if you have anything that comes up that does something else, I
Yeah.
mean, I'm your guy. I can do
Yeah.
it."
Yeah.
And it goes, "Okay, thanks for telling me." So the following week, I get called, and I look at the chord sheet, and I go, and I said, "Well, okay, what is this?" Hoping to hear something
Right.
different. And of course, he says, "Well, it's sort of a Texas blues," and it goes dun 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 dun. And it's like,
Nice.
so I was kind of pigeonholed.
Right.
But
Right.
look, I have no complaints about it.
Right. Right.
I did a bunch of jingles for these guys, and they Texas blued me to death.
You
So
know, nice work if you can get it, right? I mean,
hey,
this, it's
that's what I learned about pigeonholing and specialization.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
and they very seldom ever called me to do anything else.
Wow.
But like I said, and like you said, look, I never look a gift horse in the mouth.
Right.
I took the work and I gave them the best job I could give them. They
You
were all
ran.
really not really nice people and
Yeah.
all that. So
Yeah. Yeah.
you don't mind doing your best for them. So I that's what I did.
Right.
And
Now, you said a
go ahead.
couple things. You said a couple things already that I kind of wanna get a little deeper in on, and that is
Sure.
the first thing that you mentioned was, especially since I'm still trying to sort of keep it in the business realm, right?
Hmm.
Because a lot of people who are watching these videos and these interviews, they do want to get advice for how to make decisions, right? How to make decisions whether take a gig, don't take a gig, et cetera, et cetera. And one thing that struck me with what you just said was you had to bring your A game all the time. The
That
way
is correct.
how the way how I interpret that is that you, the minute you had the job, you were actually not, you don't, um, how shall I put this? You don't necessarily play, if whether you think this music is great or not doesn't really matter, right?
Correct.
But you bring your A game nonetheless, right?
That
It
is correct.
so maybe explain a little bit about that, because that I think
Sure.
is a really important point.
Sure. I would be glad to. Um, in those days, you never knew what you were going to see.
Yeah.
I remember one particular jingle that I did, where I didn't even get to see what it was. I had no idea what the product was,
Right.
and to make it even weirder, the call was for acoustic bass. So I walk into the studio and I'm alone in a studio with nobody else. Nobody. I didn't even see I didn't see anybody in the control room. I just saw a video camera,
Wow.
and they said, and there was no music in front of me.
Right.
What they wanted me to do was slides.
Wow.
And then they said, "Well, no, slide a little slower." No, that's not quite the sound we had. Do it with two strings. So this went on for about an hour. I
Right.
gave them, slide after slide, and then they wanted me to do some other sound effects.
Right.
You never know what you're going to see. And the thing to do is you have to basically what they used to drill into our heads at the school where I went to, which was the University of Miami.
Right.
Think like a musician,
Yeah.
make it music. You
Right.
know, you have to get in there and be not just a bass player, but a musician.
Right.
And you have to always uh, uh, do your best. You have to be prepared. You
Yeah.
have to be able to read the charts.
Right.
You have to be able to um, to very quickly assimilate what
Mhm.
it is that the writer wants. Try to get it quickly. In other
Yeah.
words, Nathan East said something really, really profound about that. He said, "People don't pay me to play fast. They they pay me to think fast.
Mhm.
They pay me to get it right fast."
Right.
And that's how it was back in those days. You had to get it right as close to the first time as you could.
Right.
And
You
because
didn't have,
that's what
yeah, you didn't have the luxury of determining, okay, well, this project is gonna get my A game and this project is not gonna get my A game,
no,
this,
they're they're
all the time.
all of them have to get your A game. And the standard, the level of skill
Mm.
that existed in New York, and it still does, was
Yeah.
very high. I mean, you got to get in. You have to basically, you know, play it right the first time, because there are 5 guys sitting behind you
Right.
wanting to do what it is that you're doing that can.
Yeah.
And that was especially true back in those days when,
Right.
when there was a lot of studio work back then. I mean, I couldn't believe how much there was until I started getting into it. I mean, I was doing I remember doing a bank jingle for a bank in Tennessee. I
Right.
remember doing a jingle for a brand of canned vegetables
Right.
that
Yeah.
that you don't see here. That I remember seeing, back in Texas.
Right.
And I didn't know. And you never know what you're going to see
Right.
when you walk into the studio.
So
You
deep.
gotta,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
so deep.
and
It is incredible,
you
right?
yeah, you had to always produce. You had to do it right, and you had to do it right, if not the first time, the second time,
Right.
because everybody else is doing it. But then, like I said, I started to see a lot of the same faces, and you
Right.
start to admire other people's, wanting to do the same thing you're doing, which is to bring the A game, and
Right.
that brings the general level of musicianship up.
Right.
It elevates and that's why people did jingles in New York, because you don't see that, with the exception of maybe Chicago or Los Angeles, but they didn't do it like we did it here.
Right.
We in New York, we had a certain level we could be our, bring a certain piece of our own personalities to the
Mm.
table,
Mm.
but it had to like fit in with what the songwriter wants,
Right.
or what the
Right.
jingle writer in this case, or in the case of a demo, the songwriter.
Right.
Uh, uh,
Right.
you gotta get into his head, understand what it is he wants, and give it to him the
Right.
first time
His
without
or
mistakes.
his or her head, because I
His or
mean,
her head. Yeah,
you know this. Yeah.
I'm not limiting gender. Yeah, there were I worked for some brilliant female songwriters that
Yeah.
were just
Yeah. Yeah.
brilliant,
Yeah. Yeah.
just
Yeah. Yeah.
as
No.
good as the
No.
guys,
Yeah. No.
better in
Totally.
some cases. And
Yeah.
so I it lifts your general level of your personal general level of musicianship up,
Yeah.
and because it is demanded of you.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And
Let me ask you one thing. Sorry to interrupt you, but
no, go
just
right ahead.
one thing, and that is now when we're talking about jingles for the audience who may not understand the term or who may not understand the circumstances of a jingle date, right? We're talking about music that's used for advertisement, right?
That is correct. Yeah,
And
for television and radio advertising.
there you go. And those are generally speaking are union jobs. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so that I also just wanted to establish that in terms of just making sure that people understand the importance of a union, because that kind of ties in with the business side of things.
Absolutely. Listen, we uh at the time, they were all union jobs,
Yeah,
and the thing about those jobs is that they pay into a pension fund,
right.
which, now that I'm no longer a young man,
Mm.
now, thanks to a lot of those jobs that I did,
Yeah,
I now have a pension, and it pays a piece of my bills every
I
month.
mean that's
So
cannot
there
be
you
underestimated. Yeah,
that
yeah,
cannot be underestimated.
yeah,
And of course, the more the more work you do, more union work you do,
yeah.
the more you get put into your fund. And
Right,
believe me, it pays at the end. It
right.
pays handsomely,
Yeah,
because you know I'm I when that check comes every month,
yeah.
believe me, I kiss it on the way to the
Yo,
bank.
it's a happy day, you know.
It is. It absolutely is.
And it should be, you know, that there's like there's nothing there's absolutely nothing wrong with asking for that kind of you know, working environment, which goes all the way around, because you know, on the one hand you have some sort of security, on the, you know, you have payments that go into pension funds, into health insurances, all of that. On the other hand, you have the adherence to quality, whatever we want to
That's right.
define, you know, define as quality. But that, like, our product as musicians, as bass players, as musicians, has to have high quality, and we're getting paid for that, you know. So
That
there's,
is correct.
you know, it's important to sort of point that out. Again, like this, we're talking about business, we're talking about how this scene developed, how it presented itself to you. The reason why I am continually repeating certain things is because people, you know, tune into a part of the conversation, and then they need to know what this is about.
Listen, I
You know,
totally get it.
it's just necessary.
Listen, it was part of what I thought about as I was doing it. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
I told listen, I've been a member of the musician. I was in the musicians union, local 23 in San Antonio when I
wow,
was 17,
yeah,
and so I've been a union member for as long as I've been playing bass,
yeah,
and
yeah,
uh, I'm I totally believe in it.
yeah,
I think, you know, in my later years, I worked for union, you know, union, you know, in my later years, I started working for society bands, you
right,
know, and they were with a couple of exceptions, they were mostly all union bands.
right,
And there was a time when, you know, I worked a lot doing
right,
that, and that was every job I did, you know, stuck some money in the fund,
there you
and so
go,
because of that,
yeah,
I'm now, you know, collecting every month,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
you know, I can't overemphasize the importance of that, and you know, I really, you know, it really makes a difference. Yeah, you can work with non-union bands, and you know, and a lot of people do, but if it's possible to find union work,
right,
you know, especially in the bigger markets like here in Los Angeles and Chicago,
right,
you know, at the end, you're, you know, if you stick with it and you
yeah,
keep working for union bands, when you're 65 and so or 66,
yeah,
you can apply for your pension and you get a check every month.
yeah,
And you know, I mean, look, when once we get older, you know, our we're, you know, as it should be, we're supplanted by the younger crowd,
yeah,
and you know, you know, we're not as much in demand as we were when we were in our 20s and 30s.
right,
But you know, so this goes a long way to make up for that, you know,
yeah,
financially.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And you know, I'm totally with it.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Which is a, you know, you're bringing up a great point, which is a fantastic segue into what I was going to ask next, because we did talk about, or you mentioned, like, in the 90s there being a resurgence of jingle work, right?
Hmm.
And obviously, at least obviously to us, to, you know, who are living in New York, but I think this can be applied to a lot of places in the US, maybe even internationally. But work demands have changed, right? The big studios don't really exist anymore. You know, studio recording has moved from being in a studio to home recording. It has, you know, shifted its emphasis. I'm one of the like, I definitely propose that there is still a good amount of recording work out there, but it's home recording work. You know,
Correct. Yeah,
it's not the big studios anymore.
yeah,
So
I'm in there too.
yeah, so let me know, you know, let's open that up and figure out, or at least give us your insight as to number one, the resurgence that you experienced in the 90s, like what was that about and why do you think that happened? And then the other thing is the move from the big studios to the home studio, right? How did that translate into your work life, so to speak?
Well, the in the 90s, people wanted to hear bass guitar. I mean, certainly there's a certain organic
Mm,
thing that live bass players and live drummers, well, even if we have to work with a drum machine, there's a certain organic thing that live bass adds to the music that cannot be replicated by a computer.
yeah,
And for that was I got called to
right.
I can't tell you how many times I got called to play with, and I still get called to
Mm,
play with a drum a drum machine
right,
or sampled drums.
right,
And it's just part of the business.
right,
It's just the way the way the business has gone.
right.
And the rules still apply where you always have to bring your A game.
Of course.
But it's just different. I
Right,
mean, yeah, in the 90s we had I was able to get a resurgence because they really wanted bass guitar.
right.
And actually I was very lucky that I got to know some writers who also wanted to use drums and
Mm,
real drums. And so I enjoyed a bit of a studio career resurgence in those days.
right.
But now, like everybody else, now that the technology is there to make this possible,
Right,
I do a lot of work at home.
right,
People send me files, and I send them back files with bass parts, and they pay me.
right.
The difficult part is trying to make those union,
Yeah, of
and
course.
that's that now that we have a new in New York,
Mm,
as you probably know, we're having a changing of the guard
right,
at local 802,
right.
and I'm just really hoping that they find a way to
Incorporate that.
to incorporate that,
Mm,
because I mean, the quality of the product has not diminished.
yeah,
It's the benefits that everybody wants,
yeah,
and I can't deny the convenience of sitting in your own home in your own little ensconcement,
right.
and playing in your own gear. And the thing is, nowadays the technology is to where you can do that. And like what basically what I do is like what I did with the last client that I worked for. I send him bass guitar with
Hmm.
no effects.
Yeah,
Just with I turn off the EQ on the board, and I
right,
just give him raw bass guitar,
right,
and he does everything else, and that
right.
makes it really easy for me. All I got to do is do the guitar part,
Yeah,
do that part right,
yeah,
and
yeah,
then he's got the rest. He can do
yeah.
all the electronic
He can shush it.
sweetening.
Yeah, he can shush it up however
Right.
the project calls for, however the music
That's
calls
exactly
for.
right. That's
That's that,
exactly right.
and that is a huge advantage of home recording, in my opinion.
Oh,
You can really zero in on as close to, I don't want to use the word pure because I don't necessarily like that word, but as close to as as original of your sound as you can think of.
that is correct.
You have all the time in the world. You have like with a little bit of knowledge. Like I'm always telling people, if I can figure it out, you can figure it out, because I'm not, I'm not technically inclined. I mean,
Yeah,
not at
I
all.
say the same thing because I'm neither am I.
You know so yeah, the big advantage is that you can really sit down, you can get a good sound out of whatever your equipment is, and send that in, and have and represent yourself in the best possible way. We're talking about a game. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. You're not dependent on outside equipment anymore.
No, no, and you can sit there with your own cup of coffee and
Exactly, exactly.
do
It's,
it and do it in a very comfortable setting.
yeah, yeah,
I just recently did a project like that where it actually was like some of the most challenging music I've ever played. I mean, it was hard, and
all right,
fortunately, the writer said, "Look, take your time. I've there's no time constraint here." And but I wanted to get it to him quickly because I he was not only a really good writer, but he was a good friend.
right,
And so I worked on it. I mean, it was odd time signatures and a
right,
lot of notes.
right.
I mean, it was fast.
Yeah,
And there was some passages that I was playing unison with the rest of the band, and it was like 16th notes at and it was all over the map.
it's
And
just flying by. Yeah.
oh man, let me tell you. And my hand was going up and down the neck because it was like, it was. I mean, it was all playable, and he made
Yeah,
it really. It was all very. It was great music, but it
yeah,
was really, really challenging.
right.
And the fact that I could take the time to do it and you know work it out in my home
Mm,
made it that much easier. And also, I didn't have a bunch of guys,
yeah,
in the studio waiting for me to get my part together. Because the fact of the business is they had the same problem because
right.
they were playing the same notes I was playing and as fast as I was playing. And I want to tell you, there were some pretty oblique melodies. So
Nice.
it required some woodshedding, and in my own, it's just more comfortable to do it in your own home.
Of course.
You,
No, no,
you know,
of
you,
course, of course. Let's also just bring it back to the business side of things. Like this, all of this translates into paychecks, right?
correct.
All of this is sort of now we heard from you, okay, this was the scene back in the 80s, this happened, like you go out on the road, people call other people. That's the way things are, and that, for what it's worth, that hasn't changed. That's
No, it has not.
everybody has to make that decision at some point in their career. You come back, you get called for another couple things, and again, you build up your reputation. You continue working in a certain field or in another. Um, you try to get union gigs into your freelance workload. It's a necessity at this point, or it always has been, really. But let's bring it back to, okay, so what is your planning, and what was it back then, and perhaps how does it translate, or how does it compare to today in terms of making money? Now, I understand, like, not everyone is comfortable talking about money. You take it as far as you want to take it. As whatever you
All
you
right,
choose to share is very much appreciated. But what is the planning concept, so to speak?
all right. Well, New York, because most of the, especially back then, most of the work was done in Manhattan.
Right,
That made it. That made it. See, it's all about word of mouth and about your buddies saying, "Hey, did you hear about so and so?"
right,
Or have you ever done a gig with so and so? Yeah, he sounded pretty good. Yeah,
right, right.
and the word gets around, which is
Mm.
how I started. The guys in the 24th Street Band and the Russell George, started passing my name around, and
Mhm.
I started to work.
Mm.
And that's how it was done back then.
Right,
And the thing about it is, because it was all in Manhattan, physically, it's very, everybody sort of knew everybody else.
Right.
And you just you just be on the scene. Back then, hanging out in certain in certain circles
Right.
was a way to get known.
Right.
And you hang out with a certain group of musicians, or you go out and and back in those days, you would go to a club, or you'd go where musicians were. I mean, back in the 80s, for me, it was Seventh Avenue South,
Right.
which was a club owned owned by the Brecker brothers.
Right.
And every musician that that you hear about either went there or played there.
Right.
And or went there to hear other bands play. And there were a few venues like that.
Mm. And there still
And
there still are today. Let's just let me just add to
no,
that. Like
oh, you're absolutely correct.
that's,
They still exist. It
yeah.
was but you just I just yesterday I read this quote from Thelonious Monk, who
Mhm.
said, "Never ask anybody for a gig. Just go out and be there.
Yeah.
Be on the scene.
Yeah.
Be seen."
Yeah.
And
That's
it worked for me.
no, that is good
I
advice.
built a career on that
Yeah.
in my early days. That's how I got known.
Yeah.
That's how people found out about me. I mean, I remember I used to go to Kenny's Castaways
Yep.
a bunch, and little did I know there was this old guy that would always be there in the back of the room in a wheelchair,
Mm.
and I didn't know who the guy was. It was Doc Pomus.
Oh, check that out.
and
Yeah.
and Doc recommended me to play with Dr. John. So I did a gig or two with Mac.
Yeah.
Uh, I'll never forget we went one gig we did. We went to Pittsburgh, and it was Mac, and it was who's Dr. John, of course,
Mm-hmm.
and Trozzy Williams was playing percussion. The great Ricky Sebastian, the
Mm-hmm.
New Orleans drummer, was
Mm-hmm.
playing drums, and John Schofield.
Get out.
And
Yeah.
no, and
Was
it was an amazing band, and
yeah.
it was kind of an amazing gig.
Yeah.
I mean, I was sitting there, trying to read his charts, which was not. I was sight reading them, and I had no idea what I was going to play.
Yeah.
So I got in there and did my thing, and we've since after that we had worked as sidemen,
Mm-hmm.
as co-sidemen on a few projects. I
Yeah.
remember I did one with him at the Lone Star Cafe when it was on 13th Street,
Okay. Okay.
and that's how you get work. You
Yeah. Yeah.
just
Yeah.
show up and be seen, and
Right. Right.
let people hear what you do.
Right.
I remember when I used to go to Kenny's, Pat Kenny eventually hired me to run a jam on Monday nights from midnight to 4 a.m.
Mm.
And it was an open jam session. And
Right.
I remember all kinds of guys would show. I remember George Thorogood showed up one day.
Mm.
The Conti brothers, Steve and
Yeah.
John Conti, who they had just gotten to town. They came.
Mm.
I would love it if those guys came in, because then I could sit down and
Yeah. Yeah.
listen to
Yeah.
them take
And
over
that
the stage and
they're
kill it.
still super active to this day. I mean,
That's
this
correct.
I get the notifications like all the time. Playing here, playing there, doing this, doing that. Super active people, right?
That
No
is
doubt
correct.
about that.
And and Jeff, the late great Jeff Golub used to go there all the
Right.
time,
Right.
and he, that's how we did it back then,
Yeah.
and like you said, that's how you do it today.
Yeah.
Let people see see your face,
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
got, and then there's one other aspect that I have to touch upon.
Yeah.
You have to be personable. You
Mm.
have to be a nice person.
Right.
You can't be a jerk.
Right.
You gotta be approachable. You
Yeah.
have to be friendly and polite.
Yeah.
It all counts
Yeah.
because nobody is going to want to hire somebody that's a jerk.
Right.
You
Yeah.
don't want that kind of that you don't want that kind of chemistry
Yeah.
in your music. No matter how good you play, you
Right.
gotta be you gotta be a nice, be friendly and polite and
No,
personable.
it's so important that you bring that up because it all translates into business. Like that's
Absolutely.
I think people very easily sort of gloss over the fact that okay, well, we need some home training. We need to know our whereabouts. We need to figure out how to present ourselves. All of that, right? Because it translates into business. It
That's
translates
correct.
into how we want to, like, we chose this life for us. Like, it wasn't like nobody made that choice for us. We chose that life for us. So this is what we need to do. And that means having an open mind, means being polite, as you said, that doesn't necessarily mean letting people take advantage of you. No,
No,
that's
and that's not what I said. I just
exactly,
said,
exactly.
I said, you just not be a jerk. I,
Yeah.
I don't know how I don't know
No,
how
it's
better
perfect.
this.
No, this is it's a perfect description because it makes so much sense. This it's something that is very very often just overlooked, especially, and as I said before, like especially when it comes to getting a concept or getting a process for a career, getting a process for making money, turning this. We study music, we listen to music, we want to make music, we want to make a living out of making music. This is a part of it. There's just no
Yep,
two ways about it.
that's correct.
So I think that was right on the money. I'm so glad that you brought that up. Another thing, and I'm not going to keep you too long, but one more thing that I just wanted to say, because you used the word chemistry. I just finished another interview yesterday with the great Booker King, right? And we were
Well,
talking, about a specific period in music coming out of Brooklyn, meaning that's perhaps a little later because it's interesting. We're talking about the middle of the 90s, and the interview that I did with him was starting in the middle of the 90s going forward. So it's
mhm.
an interesting timeline. But he also brought up the word chemistry, right? And I was wondering, maybe expand on that a little bit, especially when it comes to studio work, to jingle work. Perhaps take us inside a record date, because people might not understand how quick these things worked and how important chemistry was in that environment.
Well, it was in those days. It was very important
Yeah,
because for the simple reason that I spoke of earlier, which is you have to get it right. You have to get it correct quickly.
yeah,
And if you have to be able to, and in order to do that effectively and efficiently, you have to have, an like you said, an open mind and open ears, and be able to assimilate what it is that is needed for the music
right,
quickly and get it right
yeah,
and play it right.
right, right,
There's that's what it takes. You have to be able to, you have to be, oh boy, you have to, like, put a little bit of yourself,
yeah,
of your soul. You're
yeah,
pouring your soul out for the music, even though, like, even if every note is written out,
right,
they called you because they want you.
right,
There's 100, there's 20 bass players
right,
that could do the job.
right,
But the reason why a certain songwriter calls a certain bass player or a certain drummer is because they add a certain thing.
right,
And part of that thing that they call you for, and they never ever say this,
Yeah.
is your personality.
There you go.
You
Yeah.
know, and this is why being approachable and being nice and being able to take direction
Yeah.
without getting offended,
Right.
without it feeling like without it, making it out like you're encroaching on my artistic ability. Well, first of all, they didn't call you. They called you for your artistic ability, period. Otherwise, they would
You
have called
wouldn't.
the next guy.
Yeah.
In this
Otherwise,
town,
you wouldn't be
there are too
there.
many good players. There are
Yeah.
just too many good players,
Yeah.
and too many good players who are nice people
Right.
to have to put up with that kind of monkey business.
Right.
So it's like
No.
you just got to be you got to be good, and you got to be good, and you got to be nice, and you got to be approachable,
Right.
because that's what gets you called back. You can get called once, that's
Right.
fine,
Right.
but the idea is, for every person that you work for,
Right.
it's not that you want to work for them once. You want them to call you back because they respect you
Right.
and they like you.
Right.
If they don't like you, they'll call the next guy
Right.
that's likable, because, like I said, there's a lot of guys that could play these parts,
Right.
but they call you because they want you there, along with everything that you bring to
Yeah.
the table.
Yeah. 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 No, this is so important. So important to have a clear concept of that, and have a
Yep.
clear understanding of that.
Yeah,
Be-
and on, not just to have a clear understanding, but have a clear understanding of how important it is.
yeah.
It's very important
Yeah.
to bring not just your talent,
Right.
but just be a nice guy. Just
Right.
be a nice lady. Just be
Yeah.
nice.
Right. Right.
It,
Right.
it, it's not that difficult
Yeah. Yeah.
to
Yeah.
not
Yeah. This
to be
is
nice, and
in.
you just bring the positive, the most positive aspects of your humanity
Mm,
into the studio when you're hired, or or even bring it to, if you're at home,
mm.
just bring it to the recording. I mean, because it translates into what it is you play.
Yeah. It certainly does. There's just no two ways about that. It always our person. We are playing our personalities.
That is correct.
We,
I couldn't have put it better myself.
whether we want to or not, whether we agree with it or not, it's gonna come out. Yeah. it's
That's right.
it's kind of,
That's right.
this
You,
that's where artistry comes in, because it's going to come out. And we have, as artists, perhaps a closer way to get in touch with our personality and make it communicate to the outside. Be it in
yeah,
forms of writing songs or recording jingles.
that's correct, George.
Yeah.
Absolutely
So
correct.
no, that's really, that's so, that there's so much information here. And I'm very, very grateful that you took my call today. um it's Frank, I cannot thank you enough. Seriously, this I think this is, it means the world to me, and I know it means the world to the audience out there, to hear um these insights and these concepts from someone who has done it, and who has been on the scene. And I will, of course, link to all of your social media pages and whatnot. Is there anything else that we should let the audience know, whether they should catch you somewhere or anything, or is it all on social media anyway?
Well, if since the pandemic, I haven't been playing out that much,
Of
but
course.
I usually, it's on, I'm on Facebook.
Yeah.
You can, the bands that I play in, and the live performances
Yeah.
that I do, they're on Facebook, and
Everything is out there. Yeah.
so it's out there. And if just, I think if there's any one, like a do what you love, and love what you do, and
Right.
especially love, if you love playing bass, or you love playing any instrument,
Mm.
just get out there and do it.
Right.
Because it's true what the saying says. If you make a living doing what you love, you don't work a day in your life.
Right.
You know, because every time you go to work, it's your life's joy.
Right.
It has been for me,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
know, I love playing music,
Yeah.
and I can't see myself doing anything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, I've been doing it my since I was in high school.
Yeah.
I've been professional since, you know, I like I said, I joined the union at 17,
Mm.
and you know, I've been in the union, in a union, and working,
Ever
you know,
since.
union work ever since.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I have no plans to stop until my body says to stop. But
Yeah.
you know, hopefully that ain't going to happen in a while.
Yeah.
You know.
Excellent. Well, listen, Frank Gravis, thank you so much for making yourself available today. I really appreciate this. And hopefully I'll see you in person in the not too distant future. And we'll hang out sometime.
You're on.
All
You're
right.
on. Great. Thank you for asking me to do this. It's been a pleasure being interviewed by you. And
Awesome.
you know, you know, I hope people listen to what you and I have said about being professional musicians, because it's all true, and
Yeah.
it's,
It's
you
all
know,
important.
it's
It's all
all
important.
important. Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
All right, Frank. Well, listen, on that note, have a good one and I'll talk to you soon. All right.
Thank you. Right back at you, George.
All
Thanks for
right.
having me.
Thank you. Later.